titled Ibrahim Traoré Stuns New U.S. President Donald Trump with Daring Anti-West Offensive. So that's our main lens.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit. For decades, the relationship between, well, many African nations in the West, particularly the U.S. and France, it's been, let's say, a dominant one.
Very much so. And the source material, this Afro-page transcript, it suggests a history where Western powers really held significant sway over resources, over policies, the whole direction, really.
We're talking things like financial aid, but aid that came with quite specific conditions tied to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Strings attached. And military support, too, which, according to the source, often seemed, well, more aligned with protecting Western interests than maybe local needs.
And the economic side of it is striking, too.
Oh, definitely. The video transcript points to this pattern, you see, where Western corporations were often the main beneficiaries of Africa's incredible resources, gold, uranium, lithium.
Well, the local economies themselves didn't see much of that benefit.
That's the picture painted, this kind of imbalance where the wealth from resources flowed outwards. It's sometimes called a neo-colonial model. And that feeling is a huge part of what's fueling this push for change in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger now.
Okay, so just to clarify that term, neo-colonial model for anyone listening, it essentially means powerful countries influencing less powerful ones, but not through direct colonial rule anymore.
Right. It's more subtle through economic leverage, political influence, maybe even cultural dominance, indirect control.
Got it. And what we're seeing now, based on the transcript, is these three nations saying enough.
Yeah, drawing a line. And it's not just talk. There are concrete actions, expelling French military forces, for instance.
And moving away from allowing a continued U.S. military presence, too.
Absolutely. Rejecting agreements they now see as, frankly, tilted against their own interests.
The transcript also really highlights a turning point around the failure, or at least the perceived failure, of Western counterterrorism efforts.
Yes, things like France's Operation Barkhane, various U.S. operations. They were meant to fight extremism.
But the narrative coming out of these Sahel countries, reflected in the video, is one of frustration. A sense that these interventions, well, maybe weren't working.
Or worse, perhaps even inadvertently strengthening the very groups they were supposed to fight. It led these leaders to ask, are we real partners here? Or just pawns in someone else's game?
And that perceived failure on the security front, it seems pretty critical.
It really is. Let's take Burkina Faso. Under Ibrahim Traoré, he came to power in 2022. The transcript suggests the West maybe underestimated him initially.
Perhaps saw him as a junior figure, maybe?
Possibly. But his actions spoke volumes.
They certainly did.
That decision in early 2023, demanding the French troops leave, that was a huge statement.
The message being, if you can't provide security, we'll find someone who can.
Pretty much. A real break from decades of relying on France for that security aspect.
And it wasn't just about security, was it? The transcript mentions Traoré pushing for more national control over key economic areas, gold mining specifically.
Yes. The idea, as presented in the video, is to make sure those resources actually benefit the Burkinabe people first and foremost, not mainly foreign companies.
Which ties right back to rejecting that neo-colonial model you mentioned.
Exactly. It's about economic sovereignty as much as political independence. And look who Burkina Faso turned to next.
Russia.
Right. Military cooperation, weapons deals, training programs, seeking alternatives, you see.
Okay, so following that pattern, let's look at Mali.
Mali, under Colonel Assimi Goïta since 2021, he's been very clear, hasn't he? The transcript quotes him saying Mali wouldn't be a Western puppet.
That's pretty blunt.
It is, and his government's actions followed suit. Just like Burkina Faso, they expelled the French military. Why? Same reason. Perceived ineffectiveness against terrorism.
And they also took action against some NGOs.
Yeah, Western-funded NGOs that were seen as pushing foreign interests, banned them. It all points towards prioritizing Malian sovereignty above everything else.
And again, mirroring Burkina Faso, when the Western forces left Mali, Russia stepped in.
Correct. The transcript points specifically to a security partnership with Russia's Wagner Group becoming central to Mali's strategy after the French departure.
So there seems to be this growing view in these countries that maybe Russia offers a partnership that's, well, more reliable or less intrusive than the West.
That seems to be the perception highlighted. And importantly, the video emphasizes that these moves in Mali have significant popular support. It's not just the leadership. The desire for sovereignty seems quite widespread.
Okay, now Niger. This one's particularly interesting because Niger was seen as a key U.S. ally in the region, right?
It absolutely was,
Yeah.
which makes the shift in 2023 under Abdourahamane Tiani so dramatic.
The transcript suggests Niger basically came out and detailed what they saw as years of, well, exploitation and unfair treatment by the U.S.
Yes, and some of the specifics mentioned in the transcript are quite revealing.
Like what?
Well, for instance, this stark contrast. The U.S. reportedly paying, what, $63 million a year for bases in Djibouti?
Okay.
While Niger, according to the transcript, allegedly got zero direct payment for hosting U.S. troops. This financial difference seems to have been a major sticking point for Tiani's government.
Wow. And it wasn't just money, though.
No, not at all. The transcript raises these serious claims about U.S. military operations happening without proper legal agreements, basically ignoring Nigerian sovereignty.
And also, the U.S. refusing to share vital intelligence with Niger's own military.
Yes. Which, if you think about it, completely undermines any real joint counterterrorism effort. How can you collaborate if one side holds back critical information?
It feeds back into that idea that maybe Western powers were prioritizing their own goals over genuine partnership.
It certainly could be interpreted that way.
Yeah.
And the transcript adds another detail. Niger supposedly being forced to cover operational costs for U.S. military planes. It just adds to this picture of a relationship perceived as exploitative.
But maybe the biggest issue for Niger's government, according to the source, was this feeling of political interference. Washington trying to tell Niger who its friends should be.
For a leader focused on reclaiming autonomy, like Tiani, that kind of external pressure would likely be, well, intolerable.
And Niger's response was definitive.
Absolutely. A demand for all U.S. military personnel to leave. Completely. That's a huge blow to U.S. strategic influence in the Sahel. A major rethink required for the U.S. there.
It's a powerful statement of agency, isn't it?
No question.
So, taking these three countries together, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, what are the wider ripples across Africa? The transcript seems to hint that the Sahel could be a kind of catalyst.
It really could be a catalyst for a broader movement across the continent toward, real self-reliance, genuine independence.
Other nations might look at this and start questioning their own relationships with Western powers.
It's certainly possible. That desire to control their own mineral wealth, make sure it benefits Africans first. That's a powerful sentiment.
And also becoming more skeptical about foreign aid, especially aid with conditions, seeing it more as control than help.
That skepticism seems to be growing, yes. And we're seeing the tangible decline of Western military influence the French out, the U.S. potentially out or significantly reduced.
Suggesting a future where African nations increasingly define their own security strategies.
Exactly. Taking the lead, not just relying on external players. It signals a pretty fundamental shift in the Africa-West dynamic, a move towards a more multipolar world, perhaps, where African nations aren't content with being junior partners.
Okay, so now let's bring in the Trump factor. With this changing Sahel landscape, how might a returning President Trump respond? His whole America First thing feels different from Biden's approach.
It does. The video transcript speculates about a more transactional approach from Trump. Pragmatic, maybe, focused squarely on U.S. economic and security interests.
Meaning he might be willing to deal with these Sahel leaders, maybe overlook ideological differences, if there's something in it for the U.S. resources, strategic location.
That's one possibility raised.
Yeah.
You could potentially see new security deals or resource agreements negotiated directly.
But these countries have been building ties with Russia, China. The transcript suggests Trump might find it harder to just dictate terms now.
Oh, absolutely. These Sahelian leaders have repeatedly stressed sovereignty. That's the key word.
So, while the transcript mentions possible direct talks, which fits Trump's style, the leaders there are saying any deals have to be on their terms.
That's the clear message coming from them, according to the source. And things like promoting democracy, a traditional U.S. foreign policy goal, probably less of a priority under America First.
What about economic pressure? Could Trump use that?
The transcript acknowledges it's a tool the U.S. has, but it also points out these nations are building other alliances, Russia, China, Iran even mentioned, which might cushion the blow.
And military intervention.
Seems very unlikely, according to the transcript. Given past experiences, U.S. domestic mood, it's seen as low probability. A complete U.S. withdrawal from the Sahel is even mentioned as an option.
So the bottom line from the source seems to be...
The bottom line is, whatever a returning Trump administration does, the Sahel isn't going back to being a subordinate region for the West. That dynamic has shifted.
Right. So wrapping this up, it's clear the Sahel is undergoing this really profound change. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, They're actively asserting independence, challenging that long-standing Western dominance.
It's a massive shift in global power dynamics, and yeah, it's going to be a huge factor for U.S. foreign policy, especially under President Trump.
The core message we got from that Afro-Page video transcript is pretty stark. These nations aren't just asking for independence, they're taking it.
Actively taking it. It really could be a watershed moment in Africa-West relations.
Definitely. And that leaves us and you with a final thought to chew on. Considering the determination we're seeing in the Sahel and these shifting global alliances, are we genuinely watching the start of a more independent Africa? Or will those old patterns of influence just find new, maybe sneakier ways to reappear? What does all this mean for international relations, for that global balance of power down the line?
That's to think about.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.